Hello everybody and welcome to Parks Bros, it's Drew here, and we're finally getting around to it, our official Calico River Rapids review. So Calico River Rapids is the refurbished Bigfoot Rapids that is at Knott's Berry Farm in Buena Park, California, just around 10 minutes drive from Disneyland, and is one of the best performing Cedar Fair parks. But besides Calico River Rapids being a brand new refurbishment to an old ride, the entire land has been rethemed into a different and wild expedition. The entire land itself is now called the Calico River Territory, and I think that is awesome to see everything coming together on the outskirts of the Calico ghost town, which was the main reason that Knott's Berry Farm became a park in the first place. But I figure I might as well talk about the backstory a little bit and how it ties into the entire park's lore, because there is a lot of lore that has been showing up in the past couple years ever since they started Ghost Town Alive, which is Knott's summer event that features the townsfolk of Calico giving you a lowdown on Founders Day, which is kind of their yearly celebration of the founding of Calico. Now, technically, the entirety of the Calico ghost town takes place in around the 1880s, and the Calico River Territory takes place in the 1860s. So there's not technically a flush time table between the two areas, but they have pretty much made it as such by pretty much pushing the timeline of Calico back into the 1860s itself. And it definitely seems that way with a lot of the lore that they've been putting out lately, but we will get back into how it all connects in just a second. But before I do that, I definitely have to recognize the storyline behind this attraction. So originally, Bigfoot Rapids was kind of just a rapids ride where you could potentially encounter Bigfoot somewhere along the ride. At least that's all we could muster from the actual ride experience itself and going through the queue. That's all we ever really knew, is that there was potentially a Bigfoot, and it was quite a plain raft ride. It would get you really soaked at some portions, but that was about it. But as of now, you are now a new explorer looking to claim some land across the Calico River to potentially do some prospecting for gold or even to get some lumber. And since this is all untamed land, you will run into many different creatures, some that have never been discovered before you're crossing paths with them. So the explorers John Potts and John Coulter that actually helped Lewis and Clark on their expedition across the North American continent have decided to set up shop in helping you out with their own expedition company that will support you with supplies, including a raft as well as other needed items. Now, personally, I love the fact that they've actually added real people into this attraction storyline, though technically at the time this takes place, Potts and Coulter definitely would not have been alive, considering they were born around the time of the American Revolution in the 1770s. So they would have been near 100 years old at the time of the attraction actually taking place. But as we've learned from some of the new storylines from Ghost Town Alive, Calico is becoming quite the promising town, almost a jewel of the West, as the mayor would like to say. And that means a lot more promising additions to the town. The first of which is, of course, the route of the Pony Express going through town, which during its 18 months was quite the endeavor for most post offices across the U.S. west of the Mississippi. And now the expansion of Calico into the Calico River Territory is really making Calico seem like quite the destination for people east of the West. Now, to go along with this new promise of expanded territory, the U.S. Cavalry has actually shown up and is teasing the possibility of a new fort to be placed into the town in the next year. But of course, I will have a different video on that because that's quite a big tease for what we think is coming next year. But I really love the addition of all this new lore in the past 2 years' time, because before, yes, it was amazing to see all this interaction between the folks of Calico every once in a while with the guests, But now having this inclusive storyline that changes every single year and adds to itself, I am really adoring the possibility of this becoming the standard for Knott's yet again, after a couple rocky decades or so after Cedar Fair had purchased the park and decided to kind of go in a different direction. But I think Knott's is finally getting back on track with what it used to be, and that is pristine theming and family entertainment, which I adore. And I would say Calico River Rapids sits in perfectly with this new idea of how Knott's should be. But after talking a little bit about the lore and the backstory of the ride, I think we should definitely find out where it sits at Knott's Berry Farm. So once you enter through the main gate of Knott's, you want to take the left entrance through the Ghost Town section of the park, go past Ghost Rider's entrance, and just keep going straight from that point on until you hit the barn. At the barn, you'll take a left, and then you'll take a right at the Undertaker and just go straight past the town hall until you get to the Red Barn, famous off of its Not Scary Farm maze. And at that, you'll take a left until you hit the Mystery Lodge, which you will take a right, and then Calico River Rapids entrance is right there with this beautiful wooden sign. And I really love the look of everything with this attraction. It all definitely seems like it's in the same era, in the same area, and within the same theme. I really enjoy that everything looks so concrete in its theming. And honestly, I think this theming is better than a good portion of the park's theming. And I would put this ride up there with the Timber Mountain Log Ride and the Calico Mine Ride. Probably just below those, though, in terms of theming. But I do think the ride looks beautiful, and I think it's a great fit for that area of the park. But now, since we've gotten to the entrance sign, we might as well walk in. And the first thing that you see on your right-hand side as you walk in is some fencing, kind of hiding the chicken coop that you'll see once you pass the fence. And this is a full log cabin as well as an open chicken coop where you can potentially see some foxes trying to get some tasty meals out of the chickens every once in a while. But I think it looks amazing. It looks like your standard log cabin, and that's already a step up from what it was before, just kind of a tree-filled area. Now, as you keep walking down this curving path, on the left you can see a pesky woodpecker taking out some of the sluice wood, creating some holes that might potentially get you drenched on the ride itself. But I love the animatronic for the woodpecker. It looks fantastic when you're on ride and off, and there's a lot of different sight lines where you can see the woodpecker, but we'll talk a little bit about that later on. Now, after you walk past the woodpecker, you'll get some nice views of some foliage and trees, and it looks like a real forest, which I really appreciate. And you really can't see part of the flume from that vantage point, but you can see on the right side 2 different cross sections of the flume where you can even see a mama bear getting some nice dinner, lunch, breakfast, whatever you'd like to call it, of salmon from the Calico River itself. And I think that animatronic looks fantastic and is honestly one of my favorites on the ride. You can get a great view of her from the main pathway off-ride when walking past Pony Express's entrance. Now, once you see the behind of the mama bear, you can see her little cub sitting there playing whack-a-mole, or whack-a-prairie dog, technically, on the side of the flume, and I think this is a very cute animatronic. I do wish it was a little closer to some of the prairie dogs, just to give more of that idea of the bear cub actually trying to hit the prairie dogs. But besides that, I think he's very detailed, and I also think the prairie dogs look very, very amazing as well. And I do love the nighttime lighting on this specific animatronic. But once you pass the bear cub, you can start to hear the rumblings of some other animatronics, including a wolf and a trapper's gun going off, with a slight laugh at the same time. But before you can reach those vantage points to get a good view at either of those, you will see a setup for moonshine, potentially made by the trapper himself, since it is right adjacent to his cabin. But you can't really get a view of the Trapper from the queue because his cabin is in the way, and I think that's very cool to be able to hide that important animatronic, and you can no longer see him from the midway like you could before the ride opened. And that's one thing I do want to bring up. Although you can see a lot of the action from the queue, you still cannot see some of the most important moments on the ride. And I really enjoy that aspect because you cannot see some of the most important parts, but you do get a good view of a good 80% of the ride itself. While I know some people think that's a bit much, I really think it's completely different from looking from the queue against being on ride. I think it's a completely different experience with the same exact animatronics, and I'm okay with people in the queue being able to witness most of the ride because it really does give them a good idea of what they'll be encountering and can give them a better idea of whether they'll be able to handle the ride, especially if they're in the smaller age range. But once you pass by the Trapper's cabin, you will end up on a covered bridge, which does not have a roof, oddly enough, but I think this is a wonderful bridge to block your view of some of the most important moments of the ride, and to also give you a better looking bit of theming with lights and antlers and just kind of disheveled timber everywhere. And I really love the look of it, and it adds a lot more to that wild theme. But once you go over the bridge and take a left with multiple stairs, just to let you know. So if you're not good with stairs, I would definitely not recommend going through the queue, even though the queue, in my opinion, makes about half the ride worth it to me. It does make it tough though, because there is 3 different flights of stairs that you would have to encounter to even be able to ride this ride while going into the queue. But once you get down that flight of stairs and back onto normal land, you'll be able to spot a wolf on your left. And I really, really enjoy this animatronic. I think it is one of my favorite animatronics on the ride, and he'll howl at any oncoming raft that comes near him. And the only problem I really have with this animatronic is that the noise can get a little annoying if you're stuck in that portion of the line for longer than 3 or 4 minutes. But in all honesty, that doesn't really happen much, since at the full capacity of the line, it's only about a 45 to 50 minute wait. So if the line is all the way at the front entrance sign, don't expect to wait more than an hour, unless something goes drastically wrong with the operations. Now, once you pass by the wolf on your left, you'll be able to get a view on the right of the cave, which is kind of the climax of the ride itself. But in all honesty, you won't be able to see much because there is so much fog coming out from the cave itself to block your vision on what is inside. And there's not really any way to actually be able to see inside well enough to figure out what is in the dark cave. And of course, right past the cave, there is a fallen piece of timber, which just adds more to that theming element, as well as some nice rock work on the side. But opposite the rock work, there is some lack of theming with where they do put boats away for maintenance purposes. And I do wish that they did up this part of the ride a little bit more, just because it does look so concrete and it just looks like a backstage area. And on ride, it's not as easy to tell as off ride, but you can still just see concrete wall. And I wish that was at least lined with some wood elements, and I think that would have made it a lot better looking, at least on ride. But off ride, you're going to be able to see over it and you'll see a lot of buildings. I do wish there was some way to cover that up cheaply, or at least without spending millions of dollars, but there really isn't a good way to do that, sadly. So you will be able to see kind of that backstage of the park as well as the ride, but that's just one of my gripes with the queue, and I don't really know if I have many more. But after you get that sight line, you will keep going, curving down your way through the queue, and you'll get great views of the reactions of the riders here when you'll actually only be about 4 to 5 feet away from them. And I think this creates a nice dialogue between people on the ride and in the queue, because you'll truthfully see how soaked you could get or how much fun the people are having on the ride. Now, once you pass by some more trees, you will see some rattlesnakes rattling at some of the oncoming riders. And I think these animatronics look very amazing. As minimal as they are, they are very heavily detailed and look very beautiful. And I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. How many snakes can you see in that area? Is it only 2? Is it 4? Or is it 6? Let me know. I will put up a poll in the top right corner and I'll answer it a little later on in the review. But you will see some of the rattles rattle, for lack of a better word, and I think they look really fantastic. But once you pass by that, you'll encounter an outhouse with bear traps all over on the ground, which I think is a fantastic element of the theming. And once you pass by the outhouse, you'll see some nice looking antlers above your head, as well as some lanterns as you enter into the Potts and Coulter cabin, where John Potts and John Coulter have set up shop for their new expedition in the Calico River territory. And I think this is one of the best elements of the queue, if not for this particular queue or for any queue in the park period. It is fantastic looking and is really, really well done. But just to let you know, once you do reach the Potts and Coulter cabin, you will be asked how many people are in your group if it is a busy day, and riders in a group will be sent to the right, and riders that are single will be sent to the left. So there is a single rider line, but it's only once you get to a certain part of the queue. So if you are a single rider, I am sorry to say, if it is a busier day, you will have to wait through a majority of the queue, but the last 5 minutes should turn into about 1. So that is a nice addition to the ride, that single riders are now accepted pretty much at all times. But if you look to your left right as you enter the cabin, you will actually get one of those sight lines I was talking about of the woodpecker, and I think it's a beautiful sight looking at the woodpecker pretty much at eye level, because the queue does end up going uphill a little bit, and at night it's got some really nice looking lights and it really pops from the window itself. But on the right you'll see some food as well as a butter churn and a lot of detail, which I love and adore. I still haven't figured out all the little nods they have to everything in the park, but they do have boysenberry themed food as well as chicken to represent the boysenberry as well as Mrs. Knott's chicken dinner restaurant that pretty much made the park what it is today. Of course, once you pass by their pantry, you will see their 2 beds, which are freaking amazing looking, and I would love to take a nap on one of them with all of its game fur and just comfy coziness. The beds look really, really nice. Now onto the left side of the cabin, there is a lot of just miscellaneous detail with tools and workbenches and things like that, which I really think add to that side, but they do have open windows on that side, so you can kind of get a peek of what's happening on the ride. But straight ahead, there is a bear skin that is plastered on the wall, and I think it's a really nice looking element of theming. But I know one problem that people were theorizing about is if it was going to be cool in the summer and warm in the winter, because there is no fans, there is no AC in that building. And I can assure you, after being in there in the hot and the cold, that it was pretty comfortable at almost any temperature. There are slits in the roof so that air can flow freely throughout the room and out. So if it's a hot summer day, don't be surprised if it's actually cooler on the inside than the out because of all that open airflow. And when it's colder out, don't be surprised if you warm up a little bit with all the wood insulating that heat. Now here's one problem I do have with the queue again, and that is the fact that there is a lack of roof once you actually get onto the exit of the cabin itself. So you will exit the cabin right before going up some stairs, but above you it is only metal. So I hope they can patch that up eventually with just some wood planks or something along those lines, just to kind of add to the theming a little more, because it is a little distracting when it's all wood everywhere and then metal girders. Just a little weird to me. But once you go up that flight of stairs, you will get a nice view of the station itself, which is a turntable station like most raft rides have. And you'll also get a beautiful view of kind of some miniature fort theming, like with the operator's tower, as well as on the side of the lift, there has been a wall erected that looks fantastic and really blends into the area nicely. Then of course you will go underneath a gazebo that also looks much better than it did in the past, and you will have to go down another flight of stairs until you get picked for your raft, which you will then head out onto the turntable, which I would be careful about that. Going from one stationary platform to one moving can be quite difficult at times. But once you do that successfully, you will go onto the raft of the ride operator's choice and start to head off on your expedition. So I figure this should be a good moment to explain what the rafts are like. And there are 6 seats per raft, 2 by 2 by 2. So you will have to sit next to somebody if you have enough people in the raft. But the seats themselves are quite comfortable, and I would say more comfortable than the old. And just to warn you, there is only one area to put bags, and that is in the center console. And if you have more than 2 bags, I would say don't be surprised if water gets inside and potentially get some of your bags wet, just because they're not really meant for more than 2, maybe 3 bags max. But that's something that we've always encountered with Bigfoot Rapids, as well as now Calico River Rapids, that center console was never completely big enough. And that, of course, groups of enthusiasts like me and some of my buddies that came with bags all the time would have a lot of trouble trying to ride together and not get all of our belongings wet. Now, another thing I want to mention is the restraint system, and that is the fact that it is the old Velcro restraints. And this is just to help if a raft ever flips over. It would be a lot easier to evacuate the raft with the Velcro instead of something like a seatbelt that could potentially not help in that situation. Now, the Velcro seats are kind of a pro and a con in that way. A pro being that it's a lot safer in that certain situation, but also a con because it's super easy to get out of them while on ride. And this is a big reason why the waterfall that used to be on Bigfoot Rapids stopped showing up, because people would get out of their seat and move over to a different seat during that sequence to try and not get wet. So the other con is the fact that the waterfall is no longer on the ride. And I don't think it has been there in quite a few years, at least that I can remember. And it wasn't on Bigfoot in the last 2 or 3 years before Calico River Rapids opened this past month. But just to let you know, it is the Velcro restraints as of now, and I wouldn't be surprised if they don't change that in the future. But another pro of this is that it feels like a restraint is barely touching you at some points in the ride. So it does kind of give a little more freeness, which a lot of people I think would consider nicer than being strangled. But since we're now on the ride itself, let's get going. And as soon as you get detached from that turntable station, you'll be going a little slower than you'd expect. And then out of nowhere, you pick up pace, go underneath the exit bridge, and then before you know it, you're underneath the sluice which the woodpecker has been pecking at, and you will actually get a couple drops of water, not soaked or anything, but it definitely is the precursor to everything that is going to come later on in the ride. And honestly, it's kind of just an oh crap moment, and I really enjoy that because you really don't know how wet you're gonna get, but it's never nearly as wet as you'd expect. Now, of course, after this, you're gonna run to the front of the cabin, and you'll start being able to interact with those people in the queue by showing off your smiles or whatever reaction that you're giving while getting most likely soaked by 1 or 2 of the rapids next to the rattlesnakes. Now, the rattlesnakes look really good on ride. I almost wish they were closer to the rafts to be able to be a little more menacing, but you go by those 6 rattlesnakes very quickly, with 2 of them moving, and I think they look great on ride. Now, after that, you do encounter some more bumps, but a little more calmness in the river itself before you reach the wolf, which will howl at you and looks really nice on ride. After encountering the wolf, you will have some more treacherous bumps that most likely will get somebody on the raft soaked until you run into the trapper, who starts laughing maniacally and shooting at your raft. So he will shoot 4 different shots off, with one of them potentially almost hitting your raft with a little water explosion. But the trapper himself looks pretty nice, at least on ride, because you go past him really quickly. But immediately following the trapper himself, you will see a raccoon falling in love with a coonskin cap on top of a TNT box, which is not a good idea, I don't think. But the raccoon looks really nice. The coonskin cap looks really nice as well. I just wish the raccoon did a little more to show that he was truthfully falling in love with the coonskin cap. And one problem I do have with these two elements is the fact that they do have a reset timer. So a lot of the time we never ended up actually seeing what they're supposed to look like to us on ride. So that kind of stunk because we'd either be right before or right after that reset time went all the way through. So we'd potentially only get one laugh and one shot from the trapper and the raccoon doing nothing. So you will have to ride this ride a couple times if you want to experience everything perfectly, but just be prepared to not have everything be perfect on one ride. But soon after passing the raccoon, you'll hit some smaller rapids, nothing too big, but you'll get a nice close-up view of the baby bear whacking away at the prairie dogs, and I think this looks really nice on ride. But they're still far away enough where it seems like they don't interact with the ride itself at all. So I do wish the baby bear was a little closer up towards the raft and maybe even closer to those prairie dogs, and I think that would have been a little better, but I still think they look really nice on ride. Soon after, you'll get a view of the backside of the mama bear, and then you'll eventually encounter some more rapids as you turn the corner and see some chickens in the chicken coop, as well as potentially a fox trying to get away with a chicken or two. And I think this element really works on ride, especially with a lot of the chickens out and about just plucking away at some food. It's a really cool thing to go by, especially with the canoe out and just all those little details around that cabin. Soon after, you'll go under a fallen tree, which does not get you wet, and you'll get some great interactive moments with the people on the main pathway in between the rafts and Pony Express, which I think is a really cool element of the ride. But this is right before you hit some more rapids and encounter the mama bear face to face, which if you're on the side next to the mama bear, she can be quite intimidating. Oh my goodness. And she's honestly one of my favorite animatronics on the ride itself. So actually on the ride is one of my favorite animatronics. She is super menacing. And of course, once you pass the mama bear, you'll actually pass by a mountain lion, which if you're on that same side will look even more menacing. And it looks like the mountain lion wants to jump onto your raft and attack you right then and there, and looks fantastic on ride. Off ride, not so much in my opinion. I think the actual body work is amazing, but the movement is a little lacking, at least in the head, in my opinion. I would have liked to seen a little better movement in that, but besides that, I think the animatronic really looks nice and is very picturesque on top of that rock. Now, once you pass under that rock, you'll encounter one of the potentially most wet parts of the ride, and that is going by the TNT and the Tnt Plunger Boxes that can be used by guests off-ride for free. So if you did not know, there are 3 different plunger boxes that can be accessed past the exit of Pony Express, and you can use them for free as many times as you'd like to try and get as many riders soaked as you'd like. And I really think this is an amazing element of the ride, even though it's not technically on the ride itself, but it just adds to that interaction between guests, and I really adore that factor. And I love even more that after a while of getting other people wet, you might end up getting wet yourself because it may backfire on you. And if you're the right height, it hits you right in the face and gets you pretty good. So don't be surprised if you use the plunger boxes to get wet yourself. But I do love the TNT theming on this side of the flume itself. And then you go underneath potentially some very big plumes of water that are going to get you soaked. And if that isn't going to get you soaked, one of the rapids in that section definitely will. But if the plunger boxes are timed right, you can get them very good. And the raft might not be walking away with dry pants, that is for sure. Now, immediately following that, you will go underneath Pony Express and its tunnel, and you'll encounter a wagon or two and some nice extra theming. And I think once all that foliage grows in there, you won't be able to see the actual barrier wall in between the road and the ride, because it is right up against Western Avenue, but soon after you will be encountering the cave and the dreaded skunk ape, the Bigfoot, the Sasquatch. All of these names are reasonable for the creature that you encounter inside the cave. Now, just to let you know, in the mornings, usually they have the misters on high, so it'll be quite hard to see him, and I really enjoy that fact when he's super hard to see and then out of nowhere you see glowing yellow eyes and you hear a monstrous roar. I really enjoy that element. But when the misters aren't on, you kind of lose that effect and you see him from pretty much the start of the cave with its nice blue lighting behind him. So I do think in order for this element to be perfect for you, you do need the misters on, as well as you to be the first Raft in a while, because he does have an extended sequence that he goes through that usually takes a good 25 seconds or so. So if you're the second Raft in rapid succession, don't expect to get the best experience with Kevin, the skunk ape. But if you are the first in a while, you will get some very cool interaction with this beautiful animatronic that, with the mist on and all the lights working, is quite terrifying up close. And I know that a lot of people were thinking he looks really small, but on ride, he's quite big if you're on the right side. And it's really just a forced perspective kind of thing. It's like the old Abominable Snowman, Harold on the Matterhorn, where he's only about technically 3 to 4 feet tall, but he looked a lot bigger because you were sitting down and you were right next to him looking up at him. And the same goes for Kevin, the skunk ape. He might only be 5 feet tall or so, maybe even shorter, but when you're looking up at him from that close, he looks massive. And pretty scary too. Now, once you get out of the cave, after encountering the skunk ape as well as some rough rapids, you will end up going up the lift hill after potentially being splashed with another plume of water. So don't be surprised if you get soaked right there. But going up the lift hill, you will see a beautiful bridge that you go under, which I think is amazing, as well as the other side of the Potts and Coulter cabin, which I also think is fantastically done with a lot of theming. But once you've made it all the way up the lift hill, you get back to the turntable, get off and go up the stairs you came down pretty much, and you have this elevated pathway that is the exit queue that can actually give you some nice views of the lift itself, as well as inside the Potts and Coulter cabin, which I think is a really cool element. But then you'll get some great views of the chicken coop, as well as the woodpecker, before you go down some more flights of stairs until you're off the ride. So I really adore Calico River Rapids. I think it's one of the best fits for the park I've seen in a long time. I think Hang Time was a great fit for the boardwalk section of the park, but I think Calico River Rapids was an even better fit for the Calico side of the park in what is now the Calico River territory. I think it's fantastic storytelling. I think it looks beautiful. And I think this is more of the direction Knott needs to take in the future to be able to combat things like Galaxy's Edge that opens pretty much as this video is coming out. And I can see this being a major success for Knott because everyone loves theming. And when the theming is this good for a park like Knott, I think it just adds to the park immensely. I really enjoyed my 12 rides on Calico River Rapids, and it never really got old, but that is also a big factor that it being a raft ride will be different every single time you ride it. It'll never be exactly the same. But there were some rides where we didn't get the right rotation, I was on the wrong side, I got soaked, I didn't get wet at all. We saw Kevin reset, we didn't see Kevin at all. You know, it changes every single ride. So I would definitely say if you didn't like your first ride it again, maybe ride it 2 or 3 more times. At least if the line permits. I would say this is worth a good 40 to 45 minute wait. On a hot day, on a cool day, maybe 20 to 25. And just remember that it's only about a 5-minute wait from the Potts and Coulter cabin, about a 25-minute wait from the bridge, and about a 45 to 50-minute wait from the entrance sign. So don't expect the longest waits on this ride ever. But I guess it's that time to actually rate this attraction. And I have a couple different ways to rate it. One rating for fun, one for intensity. One is like a ski resort rating, and one is just an overall rating out of 10. So the first rating I'll go over is the physical intensity of the ride. So pretty much, if it's not pulling too many G's, which a raft ride will not be doing, I wouldn't rate this too high. So I'm actually only going to give the intensity a 1 star. just because it's not the most intense thing in the world. You do kind of spin around a little bit, as well as maybe get jostled about sometimes, but it's never to the point where your body will be taking a physical toll and being pressed down or pushed up or any of that. You're just kind of moseying down a river, which is really nice and not really intense at all. Now for fun, I gotta give this thing a 4-star rating. Now this was actually kind of hard to figure out for myself because there are so many different variants of the ride, but overall I think it's just a fun ride for the entire family. And I think that if you just want an enjoyable, fun ride to interact with a lot of people, this is the ride for you. Now, of course, it's not the most fun thing or anything like that, but it is definitely more fun than a lot of rides at the park. Now we'll go over to that ski resort rating, and I'm actually gonna give this for beginner riders, so a green circle, meaning that this could be one of your first rides at the park, and I think you'd be okay. Now, I wouldn't recommend this ride for kids under 6 if they haven't been on anything before. I don't think this is a starter ride, but I do think if you've only been on maybe 2 or 3 rides at the park, you could definitely handle this because there's no big drops or anything like that. You just have to worry about the skunk ape being a little scary and then certain elements of the ride jostling you about just a tiny bit. But now I gotta give my overall rating out of 10 for this thing, and out of 10, I'm gonna have to say an 8. I really thoroughly enjoyed every single ride I had on it, and Calico River Rapids really blew me away with its immersive theming, and I really enjoyed the upgrade on top of Calico River Rapids from when it was Bigfoot Rapids, and I really enjoyed almost every little bit of it. This is legitimately one of my favorite rides in the park now. I don't know if I'd say top 5 for sure, but it's definitely up there and is a huge step in the right direction for the park. But definitely let me know what you think about this revamped edition at Knott's Berry Farm. Do you like it? Do you hate it? And let me know what your favorite animatronic on the ride is, and give me what you think their name should be, because I want to figure out what the name of every single animatronic on the ride is. But please make sure to subscribe if you have not. I hope this video hasn't been too long for you. The recording right now that I'm doing is over an hour long, so we'll just have to wait and see what it's like once I edit it down. But definitely make sure to check out our social media as well as our website, because we do now have a website. Everything is linked below. But we'll be back in the next coming weeks with tons of new updates for everything in SoCal park related, including a lot of Galaxy's Edge content, I'm sure, and some other Knott's videos, as well as other SeaWorld videos, and even Magic Mountain in the next coming weeks and months. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and of course, as always, we'll see you on the next ride.